All right, so we have now all of our cripple joist, our full joist, our blocking, and our joist hangers in. All of our nails are installed and everything's in place. So we're ready for the floor sheathing. So what we did is we snapped a line here and we took that line and came from the edge 48 inches and 1/4. Our sheets are 48 inches. I went that extra quarter because you never know if your rim joist is perfectly straight. We got it pretty darn close, but there's always that chance that there's a little variation. So whenever we're working with our wall sheathing is gonna come down on our wall, come past here, and nail into our mud sill here. So if we come that extra 1/4 inch, we eliminate a chance of that floor sheathing hang out. We don't have to come back with a saw or cut it. It's just out of the way. And also, we know that this chalk line over here is perfectly straight. So we can use that as a reference and a reliable reference so we know that our sheathing is running straight and we come out with a nice sheathing job. So what we're gonna do is we're going to use construction adhesive and we're gonna use screws to put this down. The reason why we do that is if we use nails have no threads, and over time that sheathing with you walking on it will bounce up and down. Nails will start to pull. If you ever walked on a floor in especially those old homes with really noisy floorboards, it's because they use nails in their floor joists. So we're gonna use glue and screw, and that'll keep the floor sheathing nice and tight to the floor, and you'll have a very quiet floor. So what we'll do is we'll take our tape measure here and figure out where our layout is. If you guys remember, we did 16 on center, and you can see every joist lands right on a 16 on center. So when we're using our glue here, we don't want to glue more than one sheet at a time. If you glued the whole thing, you're going to be stepping in it, especially with working with volunteers. Volunteers are going to be stepping in it. So just do one sheet at a time. Also, if you do the whole floor, the glue starts to set up. It has a film on it, and you don't get proper adhesion. So what we'll do here is we know our sheet is 8 foot. So we land on this joist here. I'll just put an X to remind myself. And then we'll start laying a bead of construction adhesive. Now on this first one here, when we lay down our sheet, that sheet is gonna end on this joist and it's gonna land right in the center of this joist. So I don't wanna do a bead right in the center. I wanna try to come, let's get this old stuff off of here. I wanna come right to the edge of this. And I wanna lay a relatively thin bead on this first joist here. Right on the edge. I'm gonna stop at our 4 foot mark and get every joist. These other ones, you can go right in the center because, oops, the floor sheathing is gonna be covering the whole thing anyway. We got everything, and then we're ready for a sheet. So Azad and I will bring this sheet over. We're gonna do groove side out. All right, so we're gonna flip this around 180, and then we'll talk about this sheet for a second. All right, so here's our floor sheathing. It's 4x8, 3/4 OSB. It's also tongue and groove. And what that means is if you get a close up here, on this side, we have a tongue, and that tongue, this next sheet will then slide nice and neat into this groove. And what that does is, if there wasn't blocking in between here, in between these joists, it gives a nice, even, tight seal so your floor doesn't deflect from each other. So if you have a tile floor or any type of flooring really, it'll make a nice seam there and it doesn't deflect on you. So what we'll do is we'll bring this floor sheathing back here, get it nice and even along here. And we're not gonna focus on this edge right now. We're gonna focus on our chalk line that we made. We're gonna bring it up to it, and every single one of our joist here should land right on that chalk line with our sheet. How do we look, Azad? Looking good? We're looking decent here. So now you can see we're set back a little bit, and our wall still has plenty of meat to sit on it, but we're not running into any issues with it overlapping. So what we'll do here is we'll take a screw, we'll get one corner nice and flush. Screw it down. And when we're screwing here, we want to make sure that we get the screw all the way down, and we want it to get it just under the surface. We don't want to go too far down because then we don't have a lot of holding power, and we don't want to have it sticking up because that'll interfere with any flooring that we do later. So we're still right on our line here. All right, here's an example of a screw that is too far above the surface. So two things are happening. One, it's above the surface and it'll interfere with flooring, but it also doesn't suck the sheet down. So we'll have a hump in the floor. So if you see, that floor went down just a little bit more. Now we're under the surface and we're tight to the floor joist. So we'll come and tack all these guys down. Here. All right, so you can see that we're holding this screw in at least 3/4 of an inch. This groove here sticks in there about 3/8 of an inch or so. So when you're screwing, you don't want to have that screw right up close to the edge. One, you're going to blow out the material here, and it's not going to make a good suction down to the floor joist. And two, when we're trying to slide this piece in, we're going to have a screw in the way, and we won't get that piece fully inserted into this groove. So you want to keep that screw back just a little bit. All right, and then finally, I tend to not like to put any screws on this end joint here, because when we come back and put this next sheet here, we want to have a nice clean surface for reference, because this sheet is factory cut and we know these edges are perfectly square. So if we butt this sheet up to it and we have a nice clean joint here, we know that we're running straight and we're running square. So I don't put any fasteners in here because a lot of times it'll kind of make a dimple and blow out that material just a little bit. And that'll create a non-flat surface, and it's just a little bit harder to keep these sheets running straight. So now you can see we have this sheet laid down. We have half this sheet laying on this floor joist, and we have a good surface here for another sheet to lay on here. And now we have a supporting joist for this whole seam. You never want to have a joist laying in the middle of a bay here. If you do, it's going to be flopping there and it won't be strong. Over time, you'll probably have a hole in your floor because there's nothing supporting this floor sheathing. So you always want to end a seam on the middle of a joist. So what we'll do now that we have this in place and where we want it, we'll get a handful of screws here, and we're going to do what's called 6 on the edge and 8 in the field. And what I mean by that is along every edge where we have a rim joist here, we're gonna screw every 6 inches. Anywhere that's in the middle of the sheet, we call that the field, and we're gonna screw every 8 inches. So you can do this 2 ways. You can take your tape measure out, and before you actually start putting any screws down, you can measure along and just mark every 8 inches. But that takes a little bit of time. So we'll do a pretty simple trick here. We'll use our fist. If you hold a fist just like this and you stick your thumb out, that's about 6 inches. You can see we have about 6 inches there. If you then hold your pinky out and hold it down, that's about 8 inches. So it doesn't have to be exactly accurate, just really, really close. And you don't have to sit there with a tape measure every time measuring it out. So what we'll do is come back here. Again, I'm not gonna, for right now, screw anywhere near that edge. I'm gonna come back about 6 inches. Screw it down. Then I'm gonna come out 6 inches, put another screw. Come over 6 inches, put another screw. And keep doing that all along the edge. All right, now that we have this whole edge screwed every 6 inches, we're gonna do every 8 inches in the field. So we're pretty lucky. The OSB that we have here already has our lines painted every 16 and 24 inches. We have 16 on center here. So you can see we have a joist and we also have a line. That's gonna be a really nice guideline for us to use when we're screwing. Every once in a while, if you get a cheaper brand of OSB, they won't have these lines on here. That's okay. You can just take a chalk line, and this is something that's really good for volunteers to do, especially kids that are sitting around looking for something to do. And you can just go ahead and snap the lines. Get right in the center of a floor joist and snap the line and you have your guides. So as we get ready to screw this floor out, we also want to pay attention. We have our floor opening here. So we're not going to screw anywhere near where we're going to cut this out. So this still has to come out. We're going to leave it right now. We don't pre-cut it because basically it's going to be a lot easier to lay it down and not worry about cutting out anything right now because it's going to keep our floor nice and straight. If we cut this floor out right now, we'll run the chance of having this little 6-inch piece here. It might move on us a little bit. If we keep this in here, everything stays straight, everything stays square, and we'll just come back a little bit later and cut it out after we screw everything down. But the only thing we're not gonna screw down is around this edge so our saw blade doesn't hit. But before we get too far, with screwing, we're gonna make sure we take our measurements for this piece to be able to cut it out. So what I like to do is take my tape measure and run it along the bottom of here until I hit that double header and take a measurement. So looks like I have 24 1/4. So I'll write right here 24 1/4. Going this way. And then I'm gonna, just to be safe, it should be pretty close. Yep, 24 1/4 on this side as well. Going this way. And then I'll mark our edges here, just so we know, because we're gonna cover this up a little bit later. Now, when we lay down the rest of the floor sheathing, we'll know what measurements to take back from the seam, and we'll be able to snap a line and cut out the floor, the opening from the floor. So what we'll do now is finish screwing this sheet off. Again, going along our guidelines here, we're gonna go every 8 inches now. instead of every 6. So instead of holding our hand like this, we can hold our pinky out and know that that's 8 inches. All right, so we now have glue on our next little section here. We're gonna do a 4-foot section. The guys are bringing a sheet over, and what I'm gonna do here is put an expansion joint in here. So I take 8D nail here, just tap it in a little bit, nice and flush to this sheet. And now, when we come in with this next sheet here and lay it down, we have a 1/8 inch gap for us. All right, so again, we're gonna use our chalk line as reference. Pretty good here. Got a busted up corner, so I wanna really rely on this line. All right, looks pretty good. And now you can see we have a nice 1/8 inch gap here. We do that because with moisture change, these sheets can run into each other and butt, and when they get too tight, they'll start peaking just like this. And whenever that happens, then you'll have to come in with like a power planer and plane that down, otherwise you're gonna have a very wavy floor. So now that we have our butt seam where we want it and looking like the way we want it, now we can go ahead and put screws on this seam here. And again, keep in mind, we're on the edge of this joist, so we want to come about 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, making sure we have enough meat of the wood. Get that corner and this corner. All right, if we get a close-up here, this is why I don't like to put any screws along this edge until we get this second sheet butted up. I put this screw in, you can see it blew out just a little bit. And if it had a little bit more, a little worse one than this, it could have hit this sheet and it could have racked us off a little bit out of square. So I like to wait to screw anything along here till we get that second sheet up. So then we'll come along this edge, put a couple screws on here. All right, so now you may notice here, it looks a little funny. We have our house and now we have this overhanging sheet. So this is just a little bit of a quicker way of doing it, to just put down a full sheet and then come back and cut it off after you put it down. That way there's no measuring. You can't accidentally take a tape measure and make a wrong measurement. It's down, you know exactly what size it is to cut, and you can just cut it in place. So we'll take a chalk line here, and one person will hold on this edge, and we're gonna sight down to the edge of this board here and make a chalk line. So now we have a reference line here to go with the saw. So Azad, if you could unplug that real quick. What we're gonna do is we're gonna set the blade depth on this saw. So theoretically, if we snap this line extremely perfect, we wouldn't worry about our blade hitting the edge of this rim joist, but in real life, it's probably not exactly perfect. So we're gonna adjust this blade just so it's coming through the bottom here. A little bit less, just like that. Now, if we're cutting here, we limit how much blade can actually hit this rim joist and we don't tear it all up. And whenever you're working anywhere near this blade, you wanna make sure that you have it unplugged. So Azad's gonna plug it back in here for us and we'll make this cut. All right, so now you can see this cord is in our way. We want to make sure whenever we're cutting, we always have the cord completely out of our way. And we'll go ahead and make this cut. Oh. I do want to talk or mention, if you're a little bit higher up, it's okay to make this cut and just let the sheet drop. But if you are a little bit lower to the ground, if you're cutting a deck board or if you're doing floor sheathing, it's a better idea to have somebody hold on the end. But it's also really important to hold properly. If you're over here, whoever's holding this sheet, they're not gonna grab onto the sheet. They're just gonna put their hands under here and support it and let it kind of drop with its own weight after the cut's made. The reason why we do that is if we're supporting it and we come and finish this cut, if we just let it drop, which again isn't horrible, it just tears out a large chunk of this corner. And it's just a cleaner, better job if we have someone support it. And we don't want to grab onto that sheet because it could pinch our blade and have a kick out. So we just let our hands do the supporting, and you don't grab it and move it, which could kick back the blade. So AJ and Azad will hold the sheet over here, hands just under it, and they'll just let it drop when the cut finishes. Perfect. So now you can see I accidentally came in just a little bit too far with my chalk line, but that's why we set the depth of our saw. All right, so now we have this sheet cut to length. We'll now do our 6 on edge and 8 in the field to finish screwing off this sheet. Okay, we got our first 2 sheets screwed down, glued and screwed. So AJ has our next little 4-foot section here pre-glued. Azad's gonna bring over our sheet here. So you notice here, I only did a 4-foot section. I'm gonna do that because I wanna stagger our seams. So we're gonna take this sheet here. Again, we have the tongue on this side. That's gonna go into our groove. And we also have our factory edge here pointing in that direction. We're doing that so we have a nice clean edge. This is actually our cutoff that we just cut off from that side. So we can bring that over here. It doesn't matter to have a cut edge on here because there's not gonna be anything butting up to it. So we'll make sure our factory edge is on that side. Zach, can you take that edge? So we'll take this here and we're gonna focus on getting that tongue into that groove. All right, you wanna bring it this way first before we get it. How's that look? All right, so Azad is focusing on trying to get that right in the middle of that floor joist, and then he's gonna stomp it in. You wanna stomp down over here too? All right, so we have a pretty good fit here. We're fully into this groove, and you can see we have that 1/8 inch gap. It's that same concept that we did with the nails over there. That groove is specially engineered to create that gap here for us. So one thing to kind of think about, if you have trouble getting this sheet in here, this is only a 4-foot sheet, so it's not too hard. But if you have a part of a tongue that's just giving you a little bit of trouble, you can tap on this end to get it in there. But you wanna make sure that you take a block and use that to hit on instead of hitting right on here. Because what you're gonna do is if you hit this OSB, after you hit it a lot, you're gonna mess up this groove, and then you're gonna have a really difficult time on the next sheet if this was a larger floor. So always remember to tap with a block. All right, so looks like we're pretty pretty well in there. And we're sitting on half of our floor joist. So just to kind of expand a little bit on why we stagger our seams, we have 2 reasons really. The biggest reason is this floor is basically, or this floor sheathing is acting as a shear resistant. So this floor would kind of want to bow back and forth like this. We're screwing, so we're putting a lot of screws in, and those screws are acting as like an anchor for this floor sheathing so it doesn't move back and forth. And the sheathing really solidifies and makes this floor rigid so it doesn't move. And we stagger these seams so we don't have one long seam going along this whole floor. If we had one long seam going along, it wouldn't be as strong, and if this floor was to rack a little bit, it could break apart. And it wouldn't break apart a lot, it wouldn't fall over, but what would happen is if we had like a tile floor on here, the tile would start breaking up a little bit, your grout line would come out, and just wouldn't be a good issue. So we stagger our seams, so we'll have a seam here, and we have a seam here, and those seams are about 4 feet apart. As we put this next sheet on, that breaks up this next seam, and we don't have that one long continuous seam that would be an issue for shear. So now that we have this guy in place, it's completely set into the groove here. We'll screw it off just like the rest. After we get that sheet screwed off, it'll be the same exact process that we had on this one. 2 8-penny nails, glue it and screw it. And then our floor will be fully sheeted. Okay, we have our floor sheathing down. It's all screwed off. So what we're gonna do now to finish our floor is to cut out that opening that we had framed out. So again, remember, whenever you have an opening, just go ahead and sheet right over it because it helps to keep your sheeting straight. And it just goes a lot faster than trying to measure out each sheet. So if you remember, when we put this first sheet down, we took these measurements. We held that tape measure under the sheet, and we took that measurement of 24 1/4 here and on that side. So we went ahead and laid this out 24 1/4 from this edge and snapped a line. Same thing going this way. We took a measurement of 23 3/4 both sides and snapped that line, and then we also snapped our edge lines. So we have a rectangle here, which is that exact same opening that we had laid out with our floor joist. So we're gonna go ahead and cut that out. So what we're gonna do here is what's called a plunge cut. It's one of the more dangerous cuts, if you will, with the circular saw, but it can be done safely. So I'm gonna teach you guys how to do this. What we want to do, again, we want to make sure that our blade is set to that proper height of just going through the sheeting. And we're going to look 2 places. We're going to look at our blade as we're plunging into the wood, and we're also going to use our guide here. Every circular saw has a guide on the front of their saw where that saw path is on that guard. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our non-cutting hand and take this guard and hold it with our thumb. And we're also gonna hold this hand hold on the front of the saw. That way our thumb is still protected by this guard. It's holding this guard out of the way. And all of our other fingers are nice and safe on the saw here. What we're not gonna do is hold the saw up like this, start it and plunge into the wood. What's gonna happen if you do that is your saw is just gonna kick out from you and it's a dangerous cut. But what we are gonna do is we're gonna take that guide, put it right on our chalk line here, and then we're gonna pivot up just like this. Now that we have a nice secure anchor point for our saw, we'll hold that guard all the way. We'll bring it up, we'll start the saw, and then we're gonna plunge down into the wood until our plate is nice and flat on our floor. Then we'll be able to continue with our cut. When we're cutting, we're gonna follow our chalk line here, And we're gonna stop our blade right on this chalk line. We don't wanna go too far past. It just weakens the floor a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll cut all 4 of these out as far as we can go, and then we'll just kick out the excess, and then we'll clean the rest up with a chisel or a saw or a sawzall. So we'll go ahead and make these cuts. Notice I let the saw come to a complete stop before I lift it up. All right, one thing to note now, now that we started cutting the sheeting out, I don't want to be stepping in here because we're now weakening this floor system. We want to be stepping on the outside of the floor, otherwise you could fall through. So we'll do the same on this side, another plunge cut. Got those. There we go. Had a little bit of that tongue and groove. Alright. So now you can see we did a pretty good job of staying nice and flush with our floor joist here. And now we just have a little bit of excess to clean up. Have a handsaw. Come in here. Clean up our corners. And now we have our floor opening. So the last step now that we have this cut out, remember we didn't screw anywhere near that edge, so we could come through here with our circular saw. Now that our cut's complete, we can go ahead and start screwing off this edge. Again, now that we're on an edge, we want to screw it off every 6 inches. So we'll complete that, and then we'll have a completed floor system. Rolling. All right, we just finished putting in the last screws in the floor, so let's do a little recap to cover exactly what we've done here. So if you remember back from the beginning of our floor framing, we selected our lumber, and we laid out our rim joist, 16 on center. We laid out our openings first, that way we could account for our cripple joists. Then we selected our floor joist. We crowned it, so we made sure the crown was facing up. Then we framed our opening first. We got our double headers in. We screwed our double trimmers together, making sure we used our floor adhesive and our 16 penny nails, 3 every 8 inches. We then placed our floor joist hangers in, got those in place, and then we went ahead and laid out our floor sheathing, making sure that we're running our sheets perpendicular to our floor joist and staggering our seams every 4 feet. Keep those things in mind and you'll have a nice sturdy floor when you complete. All right, we're ready to move on to wall framing.